Leadership, Developing Leaders with Integrity. And so we are waiting on the final words from the presenters to be good to go, and so it looks like we're about ready. And so just wanted to again welcome everyone to the conference, to the webinar that we have today. We are so happy to have you, and it's because of your participation that things like this are able to be made available and also add to the collective knowledge of the knowledge community for student leadership programs. Like I had mentioned, today we have our webinar on values-based leadership. Developing leaders with integrity. And we are happy to have two of our own SLPKC leadership team with us, with Sherry Early, who is from Bowling Green, and also Kim Kushner from the University of Colorado. And they are here to present their webinar, their information, actually that is in regards to an article that was recently published by the two of them in the NASPA Knowledge Community Journal, Excellence in Practice. And so you'll actually be able to have a link to that at the very end if you want to know a little bit more about their topic and to see the article as it's written. And so that will be in the resource sections here at the end. But first of all, we wanted to make an introduction of the two panelists, the two presenters, as well as give you a little bit of insight into the mission of the SLPKC. Basically, for those of you that are not involved or those that are not aware of the knowledge community, we have webinars like this. We hope to have them every month, at least a few times each semester, as well as a lot of other areas as well that go along with the national conference, with the graduate students. We have a newsletter, continue to have webinars, spotlight series and awards, all kinds of things. But the mission of the KC is to have a community that will share the best practices and provide critical evaluation of the field, as well as examine standards for leadership programs, support the national and regional efforts, recognize exemplary programs, and then cultivate a forum for the presentation of new ideas. And that's exactly what this is right here. And so speaking directly to our KC, our mission is to be able to have us come together and to speak about all the ideas that we've been hearing, that we've come up with, that we've researched, and that we've also been hearing around the world and around the knowledge community. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sherry, and I'm going to pass it over to Kim, and we are going to hear a fantastic presentation that we've been very excited about for a while now, and that's values-based ethical leadership, developing leaders with integrity. So here you are, Kim. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Hold on one second. Sorry, we're getting used to the software a little bit. Hi, my name is Kim Kushner. I work at the University of Colorado Boulder as the Interim Coordinator for Student Development and Leadership. And I will be the first person, Sherry's going to talk a little bit later, but I'll be the first person to kind of introduce everything and just welcome you all. Thank you so much for taking the time this Friday to be on our webinar. As Ross said, our webinar topic today is Values-Based Ethical Leadership, Developing Leaders with Integrity. And the background on this is Sherry and I were really interested in this topic of values-based ethical leadership. Both of us have facilitated presentations for our respective institutions on these types of topics, whether that was with professional staff or with student leaders. And so Sherry is the chair of our SLPKC, and she put it out there, asked for some help in writing our knowledge community journal entry last summer. And so I said, oh, yes, I'll definitely help you with this. And we both decided on this topic. And it was really neat because we were able to kind of dive in a little bit more and decided on this topic because we really felt it was a hot topic in our functional area. So this publication really has laid the framework for this webinar. We've had a really positive reaction to the publication's content, so we felt that it would be beneficial for our members to create, so that we would create this webinar and further discuss this topic. Please note that Sherry and I are not experts in this field, but we hope that this webinar will provide you with useful resources to continue your own study and utilize activities and resources when working with your students or other professionals, faculty, etc. All right. So I'm just going to read you our webinar goals. Essentially today, what our webinar goals include are to understand the principles and theories behind the study of the relationship between leadership and ethics, to analyze values-based ethical leadership by defining values and ethics. We find that there's a lot of definitions or personal definitions, so we're hoping to just get a few out there for you so that we're all kind of on the same page. We will summarize important literature related to ethical decision-making. And we will provide a forum to share resources and best practices and discuss how to build and maintain ethical student leadership on our respective campuses. Lastly, we will examine how leadership educators can develop students who can better recognize, act, and reflect according to their ethical beliefs and values. So hopefully these few goals will be able to help you in understanding the organization of our webinar and understand what our ultimate goals are for today. This is a quote that Sherry used that I really like in our publication, "Do as I say, not as I do," and that this philosophy is not what most scholars and practitioners wish to role model or promote in their students, especially when it comes to values-based leadership and ethical leadership. So something that we talked about a lot when we were putting together our publication and putting together this webinar is the idea of espoused versus enacted values and ethics, the idea of walking the talk and talking the walk. So you want to be able to hopefully think and do and at the same, think and do together instead of, you have one value but you're doing something else that's not reacting well to that value. So essentially for students, it's often unclear exactly what this type of leadership refers to with values-based and ethical leadership because there's so many different definitions, and sometimes people, especially in the traditional college age 18 to 22, they're kind of just figuring out who they are, what they represent, how they want to show themselves, how their social identities come to play. So values and ethics are really, really important, and helping them to understand the congruence, that's the word I was looking for before, I got a little tongue-tied, the congruence between ethical intentions and actions. And so now I'm going to move it to Sherry, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about our definitions. So hold on 1 second. All right, Sherry, it's all you.
All right, so I'm going to go through some definitions of terms. And the first thing I want to kind of share with everyone is that there are over 10,000 definitions of values, morals, and ethics. And so we tried to kind of synthesize and come up with some definitions that really resonated with us. And so the first, going to kind of walk through values first. Values are core beliefs or desires that guide and motivate attitudes and actions. And everyone has many, many different values, and they can be ethical and they can also be non-ethical. And emotional investment is the part that is most important. You have to really, truly believe in the values that you have. And then when it comes to ethics, ethics are standards of conduct. Are standards of conduct that indicate how one should behave based on principles about what is right and what is wrong. And typically we have a commitment to try to lean toward and do what's right. And it's not always, there's not always one single ethical response to a particular issue, but we do commit to what's right. And values are fundamental beliefs, whereas ethics are about our actions and decisions and the things that we actually do. And as Kim spoke a little bit earlier, when one's actions are incongruent with values, we will view that as acting unethically. So articulation of one's values plays a very important role in ethical leadership. And as leadership educators, the students that we work with, the students that we teach and advise and mentor, may not have ever been asked to articulate what their values are. And having those conversations, just starting to have those conversations can be something that's really important and can have an impact just getting kind of the wheels turning. And sometimes sometimes our students are not aware of either choosing the lesser of two evils, or sometimes choosing between right versus right, because there can be many different positive outcomes to decision making, and sometimes they just need to sort of think things out and figure out what's the best course of action. So that kind of brings us to sort of what the problem is. And one of the things that Kim and I discussed is that sometimes students, because they haven't had these conversations, that there is a lack of congruence in both their values and their ethics, and also those competing right choices. And ethical dilemmas is something that we'd actually like to talk a little bit more about, which again is kind of that choosing the lesser of two evils, and when there are decisions that are kind of right versus right. So I want to talk to you a little bit about assumptions related to ethics. The first thing is that ethics is the heart of leadership. And all leadership is values driven. And the journey to ethical leadership begins with an ongoing examination of personal values, ongoing reflection, and core values. And now I am going to pass things over to Kim.
So Lucas and Ainio in 1995 proposed 8 assumptions about ethical leadership, which are central in the study and practice of ethical leadership. So Sherry started to talk a little bit about these, but again, the first 4 that she mentioned, ethics is at the heart of leadership. Essentially, you cannot have a complete discussion about leadership without including the ethical components. The idea of good leadership means leadership that is effective, goals are achieved, and that the leader and the group follows a sound and ethical process. We already talked a lot about how leadership is values-driven, and people will always bring in whatever backgrounds and social identities that they have to make a really dynamic, values-driven environment or organization. And number 3, the idea of the journey of ethical leadership that Sherry cited is really one of the reasons why we do so much values-based training. We must know our own values to make good ethical decisions in the long run, so that's why we have, that's why we're going over some of this with you all, so you can share it with your students or share with other professionals so they have a sound ground to think about these hard decisions. And also, again, the ethical leadership can be learned in a variety of ways through a process involving experience, reflection, conceptualization, application. That's kind of idea of thinking about a learning cycle. It reminded me of thinking about Kolb's learning cycle or different cycles out there, that you need to be intentionally creating environmental activities to achieve the learning process or stimulate that process. Moreover, some other assumptions about ethics are that ethical leadership involves a connection between ethical thought and action. What that means is really linking thought and reasoning with values and action, which is imperative in leadership. It's kind of similar to what we talked about with espoused and enacted values and congruence in values. Number 6, character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership. Really, this one's very important in that a leader's character is defined by his or her actions and behaviors, not simply by the values that are espoused, again, what we are saying. Number 7, members at all levels of an organization or community have the opportunity and responsibility to participate in the process of exercising ethical leadership. What this means is ethical leadership is a shared process, not just the responsibility of a positional leader, and shared responsibility of advancing core organizational values and of doing the right thing, and often many opportunities for members to wrestle with ethical dilemmas. And lastly, everything we do teaches. And what that means is this idea of role modeling. Role modeling is a powerful way to influence ethical climate in families, organizations, and communities. And we learn by watching others, and we make judgments about what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviors in organizations based on this. Again, from an early age, we watch people, we are in different environments, we have different social identities, and that helps us to kind of learn what we should be doing. And so an example kind of everything we do teaches and ethics-based leadership is if a member or positional leader routinely discriminates against students with certain social identity in a membership recruitment process, others may think it's okay to exclude others with this social identity moving forward. But conversely, if leaders value diversity and decide to increase minority involvement in the organization, then others will follow the lead. So again, those assumptions are really important. And we felt that this part was really important to add. It wasn't in our article, but we thought it was neat to just be able to lay out to you all. Hold on one second. So the next part is the 6 pillars of character. We did talk about this in our article, and we feel that it's a really important and kind of interesting part of values-based leadership. These come from, and many ethical frameworks come from something called the Josephson Institute, an organization whose mission involves improving the ethical quality of society by changing personal and organizational decision-making and behavior. So this institute created the 6 pillars of character: trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship, ultimately providing a, quote, common lexicon to help individuals reflect on their own ethical decision-making processes as well as those of other diverse groups. So these 6 pillars include trustworthiness, which means, according to Josephson, building trust and credibility with integrity, honesty, promise-keeping, and loyalty. Respect, which they define as honoring the worth and dignity of all individuals, treating others the way you would want to be treated, acting courteously, civilly, peaceably, and nonviolently, avoiding rude, offensive, and abusive words and actions. Responsibility, being accountable for your words, actions, and attitudes, exercising self-control, striving for excellence and self-improvement, things of that nature, setting a good example for others. Fairness, which they define as being consistent, open, and treating all people equitably, considering all sides and making decisions on the fact without favoritism or prejudice, and playing by the rules and not taking advantage of others, and pursuing justice and condemning injustice. Caring, number 5, which is being compassionate, kind, empathetic, charitable, forgiving, and grateful. And lastly, citizenship, which they define as obeying laws in good faith, doing your share to improve the well-being of fellow citizens in the community, and just staying informed. They provide examples like voting, protecting the environment, etc. So again, this is all on their website, which we provide at the end, and it's a really, really great website that provides some of these different scenarios. And essentially, they believe that these are the basic values that define ethical behavior. They believe that these values are not political, religious, or culturally based, and they form the basis of all their institutional programs and materials. And within the Josephson Institute, we also found, and within some of the texts that we researched, that there is another great prominent model that's shown involving thinking critically about how to respond and act when ethical principles conflict. And this is called the Bell, Book, and Candle test. And so it's nice to think about it in this way. The symbolism of it is helpful for sometimes students who just kind of need a picture in their head in order to be able to think through a model or a process. So essentially, and this one is kind of simple, and I really like this, and when I've worked with students before, it's really resonated with them to use this. Essentially, a bell kind of goes, a light bulb does kind of go on above their head, and they're like, oh, okay, get this. But essentially, this is another decision-making framework. The bell symbolizes being alerted and warned of an ethical issue. The book represents acknowledging any laws or policies that would hinder one's choices. And lastly, the candle shows how one's decision will look in the light to conclude whether one acted with reason and fair-mindedness. And when Sherry and I were talking, kind of going through our practice, I brought up that there was 2 others that kind of were on the two other tests that I really liked that were on the Josephson Institute website. And so they were pretty much as simple as this bell, book, and candle kind of idea. And one of them was the publicity test, which asks you to consider what would you do if you knew your decision would be reported on the front page of the newspaper or your actions were being videotaped and would be shown on the 10 o'clock news. So a lot of times that helps as a decision-making strategy because it helps to make sure that your decisions, if publicized, would strengthen trust and build you and your organization's reputation and would look good not if people knew about them, essentially, and not jeopardize reputation. And also, I like the idea of the role model test. The role model test asks you to think of a person whose judgment and character you most respect, maybe somebody who essentially is your role model or so somebody you really looked up to, and then ask yourself, what would that person do? And then my favorite last one that we didn't include in here, but I felt it could just be noted, is called the grandma test. And this is something that really resonates with my students in talking about ethics. Essentially, if you made this decision, would you want your grandma to know? Would it be something that you'd be comfortable with your grandmother knowing, or maybe another family member, or your child, or something like that? So, essentially, in conclusion with my section, these Josephson Institute resources, again, which we have cited at the end of our presentation, are really wonderful and give you some basis for being able to frame this conversation in a way that can make sense to a lot of different types of student learners or to your professional staff if they are really in the beginning of figuring out what this means to them. So now I will turn it over to Sherry. So give us just 1 second as we do that.
Karen Kitchener. Karen Kitchener is a pioneer when it comes to making ethical decisions. Her framework presents 5 principles of ethical decision making when presented with an ethical dilemma. And an ethical dilemma can be defined as when several ethical responses apply to a situation and there's not a clear-cut choice or path, and individuals need to kind of make the best decision that they can make when they take all things into consideration. And so she's got these 5 principles, the first being autonomy, which is the free will to make a choice and or an action. Non-maleficence, which is doing no harm. Beneficence, which is promoting good for others. Justice, which is treating others equitably. And fidelity, which is honoring commitments. And this framework, it can help identify problems and potential issues when you are considering different courses of actions and consequences that are associated. And the framework also serves as an opportunity to examine situations from multiple angles and through different lenses, and to weigh out pros and cons, and to try to find a utilitarian-centered outcome. And the next series we're going to talk about is STARET. And STARET examined domains of responsibility for educational leaders. And these domains afford educational leaders the opportunity to engage in transformational ethics, which result in sustainable, lasting outcomes as opposed to transactional or short-term quick fixes. And the responsibilities include responsibility as a human, a citizen, an educator, an educational administrator, and an educational leader. And one of the things that I really like about STARET is that the domain concentrate on how just, caring, and equitable environments can promote students' critical thinking, social justice, and also foster creativity and imagination. And I would like to read this quote to all of you that we kind of consider words to live by. Leading with integrity is a complex process that includes the moral development of an individual, the influence of role models, values-driven leadership, and the organizational environment. And this quote's an excellent reminder that leaders are human beings, and humans are complex individuals with varied levels of both cognitive and moral development, and that the environments and the ways in which we perceive the world and our experiences shape who we are, our beliefs, and influence our actions. And so we've provided with you quite a few references, and this will be available to you. So please feel free to check out some of these websites, or if there's something that has perhaps piqued your interest and you'd like to know a little bit more, please feel free to take a look at these references. And then we also have some other resources that we think may be helpful as well. The first resource is a very user-friendly values activity kit from iCare Values. And it includes value cards that you can download and print, including some blank cards. And you can use this as an activity both inside and outside of the classroom if you're looking for a values activity. And it also has a PowerPoint template that you can tailor to your specific needs. The second is a journal that we found that's centered on values-based leadership, and so we've included that link. And finally, we have the link to the article that Kim and I co-authored for Excellence in Practice, which is our online knowledge community publication. And now I am going to kind of pass the torch over to Ross to be able to have you all ask us some questions and provide some interactive components to the webinar.
All right, well, fantastic. Thank you both, Sherry and Kim. And so if any of you out there have any questions, please feel free to message them to me. We're not able to hear you all as you speak. And so if you would, go ahead and message those to me as in the chat box, and we'll be able to pass those on to Sherry and Kim. Okay, and we have one question that is from one of the participants, and that question is, do you have any resources of where to find current and relevant case studies for ethical behavior and ethical education to bring up?
I can answer that question. I have used both of the, hold on, let me just go back to, I used one of the resources that we cited, the Exploring Leadership for College Students Who Want to Make a Difference. Both of those, the 1998 version and the 2007 version, have some really great case scenarios that I've used in my student leadership trainings that talk about kind of student organization with an election thing with grades, and the person doesn't make grades, so what do you do? And then there's one about kind of hazing and athletics, and there's one, I think, dealing with fraternity life and sorority life. And then I think there's one about budgets and being ethical about how to use budgets in our residence halls. And so there's a lot of different scenarios that I found were really, really helpful that were in that. And so I want to share that one or highlight that in particular, that I thought that was really helpful in being able to, I would break my students up into groups after we kind of went through a lot of these theories and models and ask them to, take one of the 4, one of the 5 scenarios I had from those sources, and it really resonated with them, and they were able to really have good conversation and really feel challenged.
And this is Sherry, and I'd also like to offer up, there is the Heinz experiment, which some of you may be familiar with, and that is kind of a case study where there's the doctor who's invented like a cure for some really awful disease, and it's a relatively inexpensive medicine, but he decides he's charging a lot of money, and a husband's wife is very ill, and he has like kind of talking through, is it okay to steal the medicine or not? So that's the Heinz experiment. And also the Handbook for Student Leadership Programs, if you look at the second edition, there's some phenomenal resources in there as well.
And one other idea I was just thinking about, and something that I know I've done when I've worked with leadership before, is kind of those circles where, or if you want to do kind of a 4 corners thing, or a where do you fall on the line kind of activity, where essentially you can kind of state some different statements about ethical leadership or thinking ethically and morally, like it is okay to drive 70 and a 65? Is it okay to write a paper for your friend? Is it okay to not fulfill your student organization responsibilities? And that also, if you provide sometimes those one-on-one, or if there's maybe 4 people in a group, can really have some nice conversations around that. And I'm happy to, when Ross sends out some of our notes and whatnot later on, I can include some of those scenarios that I've used before that were based off of something I worked with when I worked with leadership.
All right, great, thank you. The next question we have relates to assessment. Basically, the question is, have you all done any research around assessment and values, and how is it that you capture what the students are learning?
This is Sherry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kim.
Nope, you go for it, Sherry. It's all you.
Okay. I have conducted some informal in the classroom assessment related to values, and actually the activity, the resource that I shared with you all about the iCares values, something that we've done to kind of assess where students are at and how they are able to articulate their values is that we've kind of done that activity and had them do like a reflective assignment on their core value. And then later on in the class, we kind of ask them to think back and we kind of bring some concepts together. So it's a little bit more informal kind of classroom assessment, but it's been something that's been very reflective and insightful for a lot of students.
And I was just going to say, kind of echoing what Sherry said, some of that personal reflection. I haven't done any necessarily formal assessment pieces, but that can sometimes, if you do a beforehand kind of activity, similar to what I was talking about earlier with some of those smaller scenarios, driving 70 and a 65, some of the cheating things, and then you give out a lot of those theories and models and talk about ethics and leadership and whatnot, and then you kind of do a post thing after you've gone through all of that and then have them go through some more complicated scenarios. That can really help in being able to assess whether or not they're kind of getting the models, whether or not they're kind of understanding what it means to use values and ethics in your leadership development.
Great, thank you. All right, the next question that we have comes about graduate students and wanting to know if there are any different things that you do or any different directions that you would take when working with graduate students through values and ethics.
This is Kim, and I know when I was in graduate school, we did a little bit of work just understanding the greater NASPA, ACPA, some of those respective organizations, some of their codes, some of their ethical codes, and kind of understanding why those exist in the greater organizational framework, as well as what they mean to the individual graduate student as they are going through understanding what it means to be an emerging professional. I haven't thought too much about that recently because I don't work with graduate students on an everyday basis, but I think that can be a nice starting point, whether that means some reflective journaling or a more of a class a class discussion on it. But I know that my professors in particular did do some work with kind of, again, are we following these? Are we respecting these greater organizational values for what student affairs and higher education mean to us in the greater level?
All right, fantastic. Kind of in that same vein, how about, let's see, international students? Have you seen any differences in working with international students around ethics and values?
That's a great question. This is Sherry, and one of the components that we have discussed, I've had a diversity and higher education course that I've taken recently, and we have talked a little bit about collective culture versus individualistic culture, and we have brought in kind of that diversity spin or that international perspective and talked about decision making through a framework of different cultures, which has been really fascinating conversations to have. And I also wanted to just kind of chime in very quickly about the graduate education piece too. Typically, when I have taught graduate students, particularly a theory class, we've discussed a lot of Kohlberg and Gilligan, and had them discuss the kind of the intersection between cognitive development and moral reasoning. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as well.
Okay, and actually continuing on that vein, and then we'll move on to a different topic, but how about non-traditional students or older students or even online students? Do you have any experience with those types of students as well?
I have had a little bit of experience with both working at a commuter institution where the average first-year student was age 26. And one of the things that I have found is that a lot of these activities, be it with undergraduate students, graduate students, that because of maturity level, that what may be deemed or considered something that is not a really deep, reflective, critical thinking activity, that those students, particularly our non-traditional students, tend to bring it to a different level because of the maturity level and their cognitive development. So I don't think that it's necessarily, if you're working with non-traditional students or if you're at a commuter institution or a community college, that the same types of activities that you could do at like a leadership or activities that you may facilitate with student organizations, I think are still appropriate because the audience brings it to another level.
I agree with that. I don't have necessarily a lot of experience with that, but it's also maybe, especially with online, maybe it's doing some more reflective journalism. You can do still some of these identifying what your values are. I've done activities in particular where you have a list of words that are indicative of different value sets and kind of having them narrow down from 6 to 3 to 1 and having to kind of toss away values and discussing that experience. And that can resonate. That I found when I've done it with different age groups has resonated with any age because it is that choice process. It's making kind of a large choice for some people. It can be more difficult and then processing through. And again, what that looks like, whether or not it's maybe using a chat format, if you're using a computer, or if you're with non-traditional students, whether with age and whatnot, you can still potentially have that really great discussion.
I completely agree with Kim in that the online environment, particularly for some of our students that are a little bit more introverted, having online dialogue with an instructor, with a professor, just brings about a very different type of student instructor dynamic that can be really beneficial. And I think that sometimes our students can open up just a little bit more when there is not that face-to-face interaction or when they have an opportunity to tweak and reflect and portray what they want to say and kind of put it out there.
Great, thank you. And before we move on to our next question, I want to just tell you, the participants, that I am actually going to be posting in the chat box in just a moment 2 links. One is to a resource link that one of you posted to us that has a lot of great tools and things of that nature for ethical leadership. The other link is one that we got a question that says, just a thought. I wonder if anyone is thinking about using Lance Armstrong's situation as a discussion piece for a session. And I actually was reading today a blog post by someone that actually is attending the webinar right now, in which they used the situation with Lance Armstrong in relation to the 5 temptations of a CEO. And so I'm going to be putting that online. I got her permission as we were doing the webinar, and so I'll be putting up both those links. But the next question that we have is, what are some suggestions that you may have, Sherry and Kim, in working to encourage students to see the congruence between their behavior outside of the position and within?
I think what I've done in working with resident advisors, with working in my job right now, I work with the Residence Hall Association and different student leaders within the halls, generally more first-year and second-year students. But in doing that, I often use the living in the fishbowl kind of scenario, the living in the fishbowl metaphor of talking about, sometimes your actions and words given out of context may be distorted and or misinterpreted. So kind of laying that framework, people seem to really get that. And although it's a little bit cliche, I found that it's almost worked in every single situation I've had. I know that's very elementary and rudimentary, but it's worked, and being able to then lay the framework for setting up expectations and lay the framework for having that genuine dialogue about what it means to act with congruence, what it means to be a student leader or a student advocate or work in a student employment position, and then live ethically as well. And, obviously don't necessarily always have to do be that person you are at work that you are at home, but talking a little bit about what that means, especially as a student, where sometimes those home and work life things very much collide depending on who you're with and what your environment is.
I think that's a great point. And the only other thing that I think I would contribute is just that, particularly if you are if you're introducing any theory, or you want to discuss with either your student leaders, or if you're teaching a course, I find that if you do talk a little bit about like the Kohlberg versus the Gilligan research that's out there, and talk about the difference between Kohlberg's research and stating that sort of a what would you do scenario versus Gilligan's research on you're presented with the situation like the actual in the moment. So what's been beneficial for me in the past is to kind of ask some of those very real, personal, values-related questions that would really happen in either a college student or undergrad or a graduate student's life, and ask sort of what would you do if you wouldn't be found out and no one was looking, and kind of stating, there's no judgment here, so that it's a judge-free environment, and then engaging in some reflective dialogue afterward.
All right, and it looks like the next question we have is, with leaders themselves possessing their own shortcomings and flaws, do you have any suggestions how they would walk out of refraining from do as I say and not as I do?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yes. And if whoever asked the question would like to clarify it as well, that would be helpful. But the question is, with leaders possessing their own shortcomings and flaws, how would they walk out refraining from do as I say, not as I do? So I guess another way to put it, as I understand it, is what are some of the ways to live out the do as I say and not as I do, or kind of get away from that as a leader?
I think the first thing that all of us have to do is just to admit when we have made mistakes, and I think we all have been guilty of telling someone, oh, you really shouldn't do that, and maybe we've done that something similar in the past. So I think we do have to be honest, and we need to own it. But I think that we also should possess our own intrinsic rewards and rely on our integrity to sort of do what I alluded to earlier, like do the right thing when no one is going to find out about it, or when no one else is looking, and to encourage our those that we advise and mentor and teach to do the same.
And something else that kind of came to my mind when I was thinking about that, and that's in a more formal sense, and some leadership development activities that I've done before focus on values and ethics. I have, again, done that values exercise I kind of spoke about earlier, allowing individuals to understand kind of what their own personal values are based on the list that I provide for them and the conversation. And then sometimes giving, if you're thinking about it in like a student organizational sense or even a professional organizational sense, giving them the kind of the organization's mission or vision or kind of a statement about them, and being able to then see how are their personal values align with whatever that organizational mission or value statement is, and allowing them to have that conversation because they're more inspired or more thoughtful then in being able to reflect then their personal values into their then organizational values and vice versa, and have that congruence versus not really understanding. And I think a lot of our students sometimes don't even if it's sometimes the university's mission about education and learning and higher thought and service, there's a few different ways you can frame that where maybe you can walk away and have that congruence and that better understanding. So hopefully that answers that question as well.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd like to add is just that it's just sometimes having those conversations are just a step in the right direction. And so I think when in talking with our students, when we say, okay, sometimes we have intentions, but our behaviors don't necessarily align with those intentions, that we can start to kind of close that gap with not having congruence between intentions and behaviors. And so just having those conversations and reminding our students to be intentional in their actions and making sure that their values are congruent with and their beliefs are congruent with their behaviors.
All right, fantastic. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. I was looking through and didn't see any. If I had accidentally skipped your question or if one's come to you, please feel free to message me as I'm kind of wrapping up, and I'll be sure to pass that on to the presenters. But also there was, I guess, a question or a comment and asking kind of you all, the audience, what are some of the best practices or programs that you have been doing on the topic of values-based ethics and leadership and some things that you've been working on, successes that you've had. So feel free to use the chat box to speak amongst yourselves with that, and we'll be leaving that up for you all to be able to speak amongst yourselves with that. Apologize we're not able to have the voice or the audio function. But with that, I just want to thank and take a moment and thank Sherry and Kim for all of their hard work. It is a great asset to the knowledge community to have people to be able to take their time and not only to write about it and to put that article into the different journals that we have, but be able to sit down with everyone, be able to ask questions, and really to kind of expound upon that information. So one is to deeply heartfelt thank Sherry and thank Kim for their time that they've had in putting this all together and to be here with us today. And this leads to the topic that if you have anything that you would like to present on, if there's some work that you're doing or any publications that you've had published, please feel free to contact me, Ross Beitzel at beitzjr@uga.edu. We are always looking for people to be able to share their knowledge and to share what it is that they've learned and gleaned about leadership to the knowledge community. And so we would love to give you this arena or this area to have you speak to the community to get that information out there. So if you or anyone that you know would like to present, please feel free and do not hesitate to contact me. Right now on the slide is my contact information. Also with contact information, a PDF version of the slides as well as a recording of this whole presentation will be available upon email after the completion of this webinar, and so we will send that to you, and so you can take a look at that and refer back to that and be able to share that information with those that were not able to attend the webinar as well. So we will be passing out a PDF version of the slides, which has the contact information for Kim and Sherry and all the tools and links and resources they had, as well as a recording of the webinar so that you can take a look back. If there's anything that you had missed or weren't able to take notes quick enough, we will have that right there in front of you. And so with that, let's see. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'll pass that on to Sherry and Kim, and then we will head out. So Sherry and Kim, if you're still there, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not a question. So everyone, thank you again for being here, and we will keep the chat box open for you all to be able to discuss among yourselves different programs or best practices that you've had. Sherry, Kim, thank you once again, and also thank you, Matthew Clifford, who is able to put up this web space for us every time, and without him, this wouldn't be possible. So, Matt, thank you so much for your time and for being here and helping out with all the technical difficulties. I hope you all enjoyed the webinar, and please, as you exit, you will be given a brief survey, an exit survey, so please fill that out as it helps us with the knowledge community and our webinars and the different things that we provide, the different topics, as well as to Sherry and Kim so they can get a little bit more feedback on their presentation. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and I hope that you are all going to do well. Go out and teach leadership to the best of your ability. Thanks a lot.